Hey everyone, it is noon in the East. It is 9 a.m. in the West. Happy 4th of July. Happy Independence Day. I hope if you have the stars and stripes, you're flying it proudly from your flagpole or from your garage or wherever you may live. I am Reed Galen, co-founder of the Lincoln Project and your host for today. Very excited to have Greg Sargent of the Washington Post join me. Greg, happy 4th to you and thanks for coming on.
Same to you. Thanks for having me on, Reed.
So, Greg, as we celebrate the nation's founding today, I'd love to get your sense of, as someone who's been working in political media and news for many years, what has been your sense so far of the January 6th hearings? I mean, as someone who's probably jaded, has seen it all, right, a Beltway denizen, what's your sense of it?
Well, I think it's outperforming expectations in pretty much every way. First, there are a lot of new revelations, which many people didn't think was going to happen. And second, it's really well done. The witness testimony of Cassidy Hutchinson was obviously very powerful, and it was rolled out as a surprise, I think partly because of certain circumstances, but that had a big effect on how it was covered. And I've been pleasantly surprised by the seriousness with which this is being greeted by the news media. It's being treated as a major historical event, and it deserves to be.
I've noticed that, that when this first went down, we've talked about this previously on the show and on other shows, is that Fox said they were going to have nothing to do with it, nothing to do with it, nothing to do with it. Now they have been showing the hearings, probably to preserve that audience from them going somewhere else. But last week after Hutchinson's testimony, you saw Bret Baier, who has been a long-time member of the D.C. press corps, right? Started in his younger days at the Pentagon, right? A straight newsman, for lack of a better way to put it, Greg. And you could see that he was shocked and just torn up inside. What do you think's going on with places like that, where these are folks who, again, they are part of the D.C. sort of commentariat. They are part of polite society in Washington, D.C. After all these years of this and now seeing it so starkly, how do you think they're reacting?
Well, I think you bring up a really interesting example there, right? I mean, because he's a right of center, probably his sympathies, and probably someone who's inclined to see something like this as just a partisan show trial or whatever sort of pejorative phrase you want to use. And the force of these revelations, the emotional force, the revelatory force is so powerful that you simply cannot look at what's happening here without having a strong reaction. And I think that the Fox News example is very telling in a bunch of ways, right? People have already forgotten this because it was just a few weeks ago, but we were told by Fox News, by the Republican Party, that they were going to counter program the hearings with an aggressive defense of Trump. And then once the hearings started, they all went silent. And then they tried to ignore it, as you say, and then it became impossible to ignore. So now even Fox is treating it with at least some measure of seriousness.
Well, and also, that's the other part too, which is it's not just the counter programming on the part of the Fox or the OANNs or the rest of the media ecosystem, but also you see that, but for the Jim Jordans of the world and the committee that he's, the Judiciary Committee, which I think he's ranking member on, Kevin McCarthy, Elise Stefanik, Ted Cruz, a lot of these people, they're nowhere to be found.
Absolutely. They've been very quiet. And like I say, I think Stefanik in particular is an interesting example because if memory serves, she said that Republicans were going to shine in opposition to the hearings. And that shine, the light flickered and went out pretty quick.
Well, yeah, because ultimately they're all in it for themselves. Do you think that within the Trumpy Beltway community, the DC, Republican circles, how much damage do you think this has done to Trump, his desire to run again, his desire to be president again?
Well, I think it's going to give the people who kind of coalesce around would-be challengers like DeSantis and I guess Cruz. I mean, this is a world you know better than I, but I think it's going to give them a lot of ammunition to go to party elites and just sort of say, come on, are we really going to do this again? Now, how public they will be with that, I don't know. It's possible a lot of this fades and Trump somehow reasserts control. I mean, we've been here before, right? Remember, just after January 6th, it looked like his grip was seriously being loosened. Then right after that, he was able to tighten it up again. Witness how quickly Kevin McCarthy flipped. I think this is different, right? This is a whole lot more forceful. It's a whole lot more revelatory. I think it'll be hard for him to reassert control, not impossible, but ultimately it looks to me like now there really will be an effort by other party elites to coalesce around opponents. What do you think, Reed?
Well, and two, there was with Brian Schwartz from CNBC wrote an article just the other day, Greg, that said that there's a lot of the big Republican donors have had it with Trump. I've heard the same thing in my conversations. They don't want him back. They don't want him back. Now, of course, none of them are willing to say that publicly because, not surprisingly, they don't want to risk his ire. I think they're less concerned about than they are probably the trolls that come along with it, right?
Yes, right.
But I think that there is, if it's the money guys, that's a piece of it, but that's not all of it. If it's the DC people, again, that's a piece of it, but that's not all of it. The question I have is whether or not, there are people, and you saw them in last week's debate with in Wyoming with Liz Cheney as she's trying to go for re-election, that, there are these people out there, Greg, who they're not Trump anymore. They're ultra MAGA. They have surpassed him.
Yes,
and, they're not. It's right. Anthony Fauci being a war criminal, Ukraine being a bunch of anti-Semites and drug addicts, whatever it is. They've gone off to say things that are even crazier than what Trump ever came up with.
Yeah, and the spirit of insurrectionism has clearly kind of moved well past Trump, too. I mean, obviously, he's still saying the same things he always said, and he's saying that this is the January 6th committee is illegitimate and so forth. And I forget what he said about Cassidy Hutchinson, but it was, something pretty vile.
He didn't know who she was, never heard of her, wanted a job at Mar-a-Lago. She didn't get it. I mean, it's like, Greg, he has this mental script of people who he clearly knows well. He's clearly seen, he clearly has a relationship with on some level. And then, they're total strangers to him.
Yeah, exactly. And so the insurrectionist spirit has moved past him, right? At this point, all these candidates who are running for office across the country kind of on an explicit vow to be willing to subvert future election losses are almost, members of a social movement at this point. I mean, this is kind of critical for your good standing in certain parts of the Republican Party, the willingness to not just say, Trump was right, Trump won, but to look forward and say, you know what? We're not going to let a Democrat win an election again in this state if I get power over the election machinery. And that's really something that's taken on a life of its own.
Right. We've seen that with Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania already.
A lot of them.
The guy that was in fifth place in the Michigan governor's race got arrested for being at the Capitol on January 6th, shot to the top of the polls. Yeah. Right. And now they're taking this too, Greg. It's not just about insurrection again. Now it's about abortion, any particular gay marriage. Right. In that same debate where those 5 members, Republican members running for governor of Michigan, they all said that, gay rights weren't a thing. Marriage should be reexamined. So this is not just a matter of political, you're right, but it is a social and cultural jihad almost that they're trying to turn back a clock to a time where never really existed, right? The Donna Reed thing was always, something like my grandmother, Donna, I can promise you that. I don't know about yours.
Yeah, I mean, critical race theory, that was sort of an early kind of harbinger of where this stuff was headed in terms of the jihad, right? One big question after the Georgia races in which Democrats won 2 special elections to take control of the Senate in early 2021, one big question was whether the MAGA base would kind of lose its energy and start staying home once Trump kind of faded. And, our dismay, it sure looks like they found this new way to activate that constituency through the type of cultural jihadism you're talking about.
Well, I think that's right. I think that's the other part, which is you're seeing it now with otherwise what we would have called Trumpy Republicans. They might be Trumpy Republicans, but they're not ultra MAGA, right? And it is a distinction, I think,
Right.
with a difference. I've spoken about this before. Just up the road for you, in Philadelphia, or excuse me, in Pennsylvania, where in the U.S. Senate primary there for the Republicans, you had Oz and Dave McCormick come in at 31% apiece, and an absolute, out of nowhere, Kathy Barnett at 24% after not running a campaign. She got that 24% from somewhere, right? You and I didn't see it because we don't live in that world, but a lot of Pennsylvania dyed-in-the-wool Republicans didn't think that either McCormick or Oz were their, the brand that they were looking for. Now we see Oz is down, 9 or 10, is favorable, unfavorable, is in the tank. And so to your point, you have to be a certain flavor of something, but at the same time, if and when you're not, they will actually aggressively stay home.
You guys, I forget which one, maybe it was something along the line this we're talking about. McCarthy is telling his big donors that don't worry, if we take the House, we'll keep the Trumpists at bay.
Right.
Do you remember that? Was that?
Yeah. We were talking about it. Yeah. We had a conversation with, it was like if McCarthy was telling his big donors, look, I just need 20 normal Republicans, moderate Republicans, to be speaker and to just make sure everything stays in line. And we were like, you're already down like 8, Kevin. Like you now need 30 people like that.
No, I think that's right. And clearly, I guess if the forecasts are right, it'll be something like a 20 seat victory. So, if there's a hard core of Trumpists in the House, I think it's going to be pretty rough for them.
So, I want to stay on January 6th, but I actually want to rewind to just after the 2020 election, Greg, because you play a small role here. So it came out on Thursday of last week that then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows had in his possession an opposition research document about the Lincoln Project, about me, Rick Wilson, and Stuart Stevens specifically around our efforts to discourage, so-called white shoe law firms like Jones Day from participating in his, cockamamie court challenges in places like Pennsylvania. We started that effort, I believe, on January 9th, after we saw that the Biden campaign, obviously after being ordained as president-elect, went into transition mode. I think you and Rick had spoken about this. We knocked, three of their key firms off the stage. And so on November 11th, just a few days later, Mark Meadows sends this memo to no other than the Attorney General of the United States, Bill Barr. Now, we don't believe that Barr ever did anything about it, but we're requesting all the information we can get from both the White House and the Justice Department. But what does it say to you that the White House was actively in that time trying to take on political opponents, not in the normal opposition research drops of context of a campaign, but with the highest law enforcement office in the land?
Well, I mean, that would be just a continuation of what they did for 4 years, right? Which was essentially take the Justice Department and turn it into President Trump's personal political weapon. The fact that it continued after they lost seems pretty striking, right? In the sense that, they still, on some level, wanted to just milk the Justice Department for all they could in terms of using it as a political weapon. Right.
Well, and we see that the intimidation like this hasn't stopped.
Right.
We know that numerous witnesses to the January 6th committee have been getting these, almost mob-like texts, just keep your mouth shut, everything will be fine. And so, it's one of those things where, from our perspective, Greg, no one has to do this kind of work, but someone needs to, because unless you don't, then everybody just sits quietly. And as everybody sits quietly, hoping the world will pass them by, one, we know it never does, as we've said before. But two, that clears the path for people like Meadows and Trump and all these other goons to get away with it. And I think that's the part that you're seeing, is that they're not getting away with it. And there's going to be, a lot of hellfire and fury coming down for a lot of these people. Trump's never going down for any of them. And it'll be interesting to see how many of them start flipping on him, because they don't want to go to federal prison either.
Right. It's starting to look like there's going to be real action, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And, that's the other part, too, is, talking to David Loffman, who I know from, used to be a senior person at DOJ in the National Security Division. It sounds not unlike a mob prosecution, right? They'll start with the little fish and they'll work their way up. The littlest of the fish, so to speak, were the ones actually at the Capitol. But there's certainly a lot of other people, of an ilk like Cassidy Hutchinson, not her in particular, but, in that role, in that sort of tier, both inside the administration, inside the campaign, ancillary to it, whether or not it was event people, fundraisers, everything else, who now are, probably spending a hell of a lot more money than they ever thought they would on criminal defense attorneys. And I wonder how many of them believe that, if they don't get their testimony out now in front of this committee, and make sure that, they've indicated to the Justice Department, like, we're ready to play ball, that a friendly U.S. attorney and FBI agent won't sit across the table from you and your attorney and say, look, this is going to go one of two ways, right? You're going to work with us and we're going to make it work, or you're not going to work with us and it's going to be bad for you. And my guess is there's a lot of folks who don't want it to work out badly for them, Greg.
Well, I mean, Trump loyalty only goes one way, right? I mean, we saw that over and over and over again. The second he's done with someone, he just tosses them aside like one of his Big Mac cartons, And so it doesn't seem to me that people would have much of an incentive to protect him. But on the other hand, it's a little alarming to see people like Meadows and Bannon and all the rest essentially saying, screw you to the committee, to a congressional subpoena, which is
right.
That's some pretty serious defiance right there. And I guess their own futures are what they're considering there, because I suppose if you cooperate with the January 6th committee, you're pretty much dead from there on out. And it's less about loyalty to Trump than that. But still, I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens when the real pressure starts. One thing about the Lincoln Project's pressure on corporations that I wanted to sort of bring up is they're in an interesting position, right? We're seeing big chunks of corporate America kind of doing the right thing here and there, right?
Right.
It takes a lot to get them there, but when Georgia started passing its ridiculous and onerous voter suppression law, a lot of Georgia corporations came out and kind of braved the attacks and threats from senior Republicans in the process. Yet at the same time, they're still going to Kevin McCarthy and saying, we want a Republican House. I guess this is kind of your wheelhouse. At what point do corporations decide that the tax cuts aren't worth empowering this movement anymore?
Well, I would say this is when it starts to impact their bottom line beyond tax revenue, or tax, the tax bill they have to pay. You just saw, Greg, a few weeks ago that they, I don't know, some cockamamie group started a new, America First Chamber of Commerce or something, where it's, going to go, it's not going to be part of the woke corporate agenda. But the truth is that, if you look at it from the statements they make on social issues to, ESG, I think corporate America fundamentally wants to be in the right place on this stuff. But, they have a lot of very powerful, very well thought of lobbyists, external affairs people who live in D.C. saying, just let this pass and it'll be fine. And as I said, just like with individuals, it's never fine. You're going to end up on the wrong side of somebody. I mean, Ted Cruz, Rick Scott, Marco Rubio, all of these people, they are not capitalists, Greg. I don't know what they are. Maybe it is a fascist economic ideology, but they've said, we're going to make sure you pay all your taxes. I'm not going to take any money from you, so don't try and do me any favors. Oh, and by the way, we're going to make sure, as Rubio said, that American corporations, put forth an American vision, right? A traditional American vision. Well, who gets to decide that? That doesn't sound very capitalist to me. It doesn't sound very free market economics to me. And so I think that there are a lot of corporations who also, listen, they also bought McCarthy telling them for months, you need a Republican House. But let's be clear, like, they don't want to deal with Jim Jordan. They don't want to deal with Marjorie Taylor Greene. They don't want to deal with any of these people who might come to the fore. Because here's the thing is, for those types, for the ultra MAGAs, taking on corporate America and beating them over the head only makes them more popular with their people, because so many of the folks that are, fighting for their status in the United States believe that corporate America has done them wrong. Now, in some cases, they have a legitimate gripe, but the folks who are most upset about it are willing to take it to a place that I think that Marjorie Taylor Greene or any of them are happy to go with them. And so I would hope in the coming months that they see that this is more than about taxes. Let's be clear, too. None of these companies aren't making money hand over fist either, right? I mean, they're doing very, very well in a time when we see, inflation for the first time in 40 years, expensive energy, et cetera, et cetera. But all right, so Greg, I'm going to let you get back to your 4th of July. What else are you looking at out there?
Well, I'm pretty focused on the January 6th committee, but I'll tell you what I'm really interested in right now is what's going to happen at the level of the states with now in the post-Roe world. I think we're going to see some really serious tensions out there, and possibly violence as well, once these Republican legislatures start pushing through even more radical anti-abortion laws. I think they're going to start to target people who try to cross state lines for an abortion. They're going to adopt the Texas approach and try to target people in blue states who help people from red states get an abortion. And, I was very worried about a tweet I saw from Marjorie Taylor Greene when she connected the gun debate with the abortion debate. It was almost something as explicit as, they're going to take away our guns so we can't, tackle the abortion problem. It was something like that. It might have even been more blatant. And with Texas passing that vigilante bill, which empowers citizens to target people with lawsuits, with red states starting to try to take that kind of mechanism and apply it to people in blue states, I don't know how successful legally they'll be, but they're going to try that stuff. And a lot of people are going to get very worked up, and it's going to lead to some much worse conflicts, I think.
Well, that's the other thing too, and just on the Second Amendment piece too. Just as we've seen throughout history, if and when authoritarian regimes take over, it's not as if they decide, okay, we're in charge now, so therefore we're going to let 400 million guns run around the country unaccounted for. Right? Because when they take over, Greg, as you know, they want to be the only source of power, and frankly, the only source of violent power, available in a country. And so I think sometimes, a lot of the hardcore Second Amendment advocates are a little bit whistling past the graveyard. But on the choice issue in these states, I think you're absolutely right. In an otherwise normal time, whether or not it was folks crossing state lines, those things, maybe it's an interstate commerce deal from a court, but, or, freedom of movement, right? I mean, the idea, like, do you have to have a passport to leave Missouri and go to Illinois? I mean, it's just things that we can't possibly imagine. But here we are, Greg, every new day and every new week and every new month, breaks some other tradition that we've frankly taken for granted. All right. Well, listen, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I think that because of that, and because of many other things, because of the way the Supreme Court has handled the end of this term, which was just a major transformation, just forced down everybody's throats in a matter of days. I mean, we knew it was coming, but still, it was startling to everybody. That I think tensions are going to be very high.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think they are high. Greg, I want to thank you for joining me today. I hope you and yours have a happy 4th. And just one last note, gang, before I let you go for the day. Greg made a really good point, which is when these folks start to move, they move fast. They move very, very fast. If you look at where the United States was on January 5th, 2021, and where it is as we sit here on July 4th, 2022, look at the radical change we've seen, the radical changes we've seen across just about everything we could ever have imagined. And it's something that we can't take for granted. Everybody, I hope you have a great holiday. I hope you stay safe out there. I hope you stay healthy. Greg, once again, thank y'all, and we'll see you next time.